Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give another minute or two for people to kind of trickle in after lunch, and then we'll get started with the SB 1121 State and Local Transportation System Needs Assessment Stakeholder Work Group Kickoff. So thank you. All righty, I think we'll just get started. Again, welcome everyone to the Senate Bill 1121 State and Local Transportation System Needs Stakeholder Work Group Kickoff. The Commission is formally kicking off the development of our Transportation Needs Assessment Report. The interim report is due January 1st of 2024 this year, and the full report is due January 1st, 2025. So if you want to drop your name in the chat and the organization that you're with, please feel free to do so. And Bridget, if you can move to the next slide, please. This is the agenda that we have for today's stakeholder work group kickoff meeting. And I just wanted to extend my gratitude and thanks for all of you participating in this work group meeting today. This report will be, I think, very important for any future funding decisions that come down the line through the California legislature. So we really want to work with our partners to ensure that we make a very good, coherent effort in our message of what our needs are and what some of our challenges are coming down in the future. So with that, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Tanisha Taylor, to provide a welcome and opening remarks.
Hey everyone, I just want to first echo Francis's comments about the excitement of the moment that we're in, and thank you all for joining us here today. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tanisha Taylor, and I am the Executive Director of the California Transportation Commission. So thank you for joining us today as the Commission begins development of the Senate Bill 1121 State and Local Transportation System Needs Assessment. We appreciate you taking the time to participate in this official stakeholder work group, which will help inform our work. The goal for the assessment is to provide a comprehensive overview of California's transportation system needs at the state, regional, and local levels, as well as the necessary costs to operate and maintain this system. The assessment will not only provide a comprehensive picture of the state of California's transportation system needs, but include a set of policy recommendations that will inform policymakers and transportation officials when crafting any future legislation related to transportation funding and investments. Such was the case for Senate Bill 1, where the California legislature utilized the findings and policy recommendations from the Commission's 2011 Transportation Needs Assessment to help formulate that landmark transportation bill. Developing this needs assessment for the California legislature can only be successful if we work together with all of you, our stakeholders and partners. This is critical to ensure we are accurately capturing essential transportation infrastructure and operational needs, as well as revenue projections, while also clearly conveying how the transition to zero-emission vehicles will impact the fuel tax revenue stream, and in turn, how this affects our ability to deliver accessible, resilient transit, active transportation, and roadway projects that support achievement of our state's goals. Again, thank you all for the opportunity and for everybody who's participating in this process today. We cannot do this work without you, and I encourage all of you to reach out to our team and become active participants throughout this process. We are here to help as we develop this and answer any questions you may have. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Francis Diaz-Sanchez from our team for the next item.
Yes, and I totally forgot to introduce myself. I am Francis Diaz-Sanchez, and I am the program manager for the development of the SB 1121 report. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Justin Hall to just go over briefly the webinar logistics and while using Zoom.
Yeah, thank you. Pulling it up now. Appreciate it. Welcome to the SB 1121 Stakeholder Work Group Kickoff Meeting. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our workshops can take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders around California. We now offer hybrid and fully virtual workshops to allow our stakeholders to participate more fully no matter where you are. The workshop agenda is located on our website at www.catc.ca.gov. I've also uploaded the agenda and presentation via the webinar chat. Live closed captioning is available on this webinar. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For all our workshops, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments throughout this workshop. For those attending via Zoom, you should see the webinar control panel likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it's your turn to make your comment. Alternately, you may use the Q&A tab to submit the comment or question. Commission staff will read that on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise. Please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Justin. So we'll move over to the next slide. And so I'm going to provide a brief overview on Senate Bill 1121. And so it'll give you more context as to what the purpose of the meeting is today. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 21, authored by Senator Gonzalez, was chaptered in 2022, and it requires that the commission, in consultation with CalSTA and Caltrans, to prepare a needs assessment of the costs to operate, maintain, and provide for the necessary future growth of the state and local transportation system over the next 10 years, so out to 2035. We must be consistent with the California Transportation Plan with specific consideration to climate resiliency needs. We are required to forecast the expected revenue, which will include federal, state, and local revenues to pay for the costs identified in our needs assessment and any shortfall in that revenue to cover the costs. Most importantly, during the full assessment or complete needs assessment, we will be providing recommendations on how that revenue shortfall should be addressed. And so I think for many of us here today, that's one of the biggest reasons why we are working with our partners to develop this report and to provide a cohesive message and, to deliver recommendations that we can stand behind to the legislature. So, that goes into the next point where we are consulting with our partners and stakeholders, which are explicitly identified in this legislation listed out here. So many of our partners in community-based organizations, environmental justice and equity-based organizations, organized labor, the transportation industry, which includes NPOs, county transportation commissions, regional transportation planning agencies, local governments, and transit operators. That is not who we're limited to, I think just at minimum who we should be working with while developing both the interim and complete needs assessment report. Today's focus will kind of go into more detail about the interim needs assessment that's due to the legislature on or before January 1st, 2024, and the completed needs assessment that's due on or before January 1st, 2025. The last needs assessment that we did do was done in 2011. And the key difference for this needs assessment is that this will be regularly updated every 5 years thereafter. So this will give a regular update to the legislature on the status of our transportation needs and where our revenue projections are. With that, next slide, please. So to just kind of provide an overview on the scope of the interim transportation needs assessment report that's due just in 3.5 months. Next slide, please. The report will be broken into 3 sort of components, essentially. So what the commission is hoping to focus on is to provide just an overview on existing information on projected transportation funding and needs. And so that will include essentially the state highway system management plan, the local streets and roads needs assessment report, what the project needs are in the California State Rail Plan, and the cost of transportation system improvements that are included in our RTPs, our STIP, and some other funding program sources that we'll be getting into more detail with everyone here either today or at our next stakeholder work group meeting. So we are also currently working with our partners to identify any available data for transit operators, transit operations and maintenance across the state. I think in particularly with CalSTA, since they are heading the effort on SB 125 and collecting a lot of transit operation plans and data. So we will take what we can feasibly use in that report and put it in the interim needs assessment, and take their full report to fold into our full needs assessment there. So we'll again provide an overview of existing information, a status report on where these assessment efforts are completed to date, and a plan for completing the full transportation needs assessment in the interim report. Next slide, please. And so, briefly here in the interim needs assessment report timeline. Next slide, please. I just kind of wanted to go over what we've done so far and what we are anticipating to do until we have to submit the report January 1st, 2024 to the legislature. We've had some briefings with the legislative staff on sort of our game plan. We've provided an overview to our commissioners, met with CalSTA and Caltrans on some of the data needs that we're looking into currently that they have access to, or other information, briefing a few key stakeholders early on to kind of talk about additional data and report needs that we needed. And we did put out a bid for our RFP. And so we'll be closing in on our consultant who will hopefully be on board by the end of this month to help us really kickstart the full needs assessment, as we're working on developing the interim report in-house, at least the first portion of it. And today is the biggest kind of component on starting the full needs assessment. So this is our kickoff meeting. And I plan to take this, or commission will have this as an item to present to commissioners at our August CTC meeting. So this is our big formal effort on kicking off the SB 1121 report. And then after the commission meeting, we're really going to be focusing on drafting content for the interim report. So we can have it done by the end of September and have the draft report out for public comment in October prior to the October commission meeting. We do intend to have a single public workshop on the interim report in early October, and to bring this item to the CTC meeting as well. We're going to finalize the report by incorporating all the comments that we've received in November, and then bringing the final report to the commission in December, and then turning it to this legislature January 1st, 2024. So that's our timeline for the interim needs assessment. It's, you know, what we feel is straightforward enough in trying to give like a problem statement essentially as to what's going on with our transportation system on the state and local side, you know, what our projected costs are, and sort of what we're going to need to do in the full report. Next slide, please. So this kind of briefly goes over our outreach and engagement efforts for Senate Bill 1121, a lot that I've already discussed. Next slide, please. In terms of stakeholder engagement, today is our kickoff meeting. We do hope to meet bi-weekly initially for the interim needs assessment, and as time moves on, I think we'll reassess with the group the meeting frequency. There, all the materials will be posted online and accessible for anyone to review if you cannot make a stakeholder meeting. We plan to go out to meet with the RTPA members, our CTF, and any other standing meetings as needed. So we're happy to meet with any of you if there are any specific questions you may have during the development of the interim or complete needs assessment report. I am currently working with my colleague on touching base with the Native American Advisory Committee, and working through her on providing updates to the NAC and also with Caltrans on that front. We are also going to be working with our Equity Advisory Committee to solicit input on the development of the report, particularly, I think, as we begin to form some of our policy recommendations. In terms of public outreach, you know, we do have 3 workshops that are identified there. So our first workshop is in the fall of 2023. So we're shooting for early October to gather any additional input that may, you know, be needed for the interim needs assessment that will inform the full needs assessment. And then for the complete transportation needs assessment report, we anticipating having a spring workshop and a fall workshop. So that's really it. The stakeholder working group will be meeting at a regular frequency. So that's where I think the bulk of our sort of touch points will be with our stakeholders and our partners during the development of this plan. Next slide, please. So next slide. The purpose of the Senate Bill 1121 stakeholder work group is really, next slide, is really to guide the development of the interim and complete needs assessment report. We really need your help to make, to ensure that, again, the information that we are going to present to the legislature is accurate and as precise as possible about our transportation needs, what our projected revenue costs are going to be. You know, did we capture all the revenue streams that are appropriate for this report, and what the impact essentially on the transition to zero emission vehicles is going to do to our revenue stream as well. I think many of us in the transportation realm already know that our fuel revenue is just in sort of a precarious state due to a multitude of reasons. And, you know, that's also another reason why we're focusing on climate adaptation, because we know that that's been having a really big impact on our transportation funding needs or transportation, it impacts on our transportation projects and also affecting our transportation funding needs. So that's really a big reason why we're needing your help in the development of this report. In addition to that, identifying any other data or information gaps that we may not have considered. Again, ensuring the revenue projections are realistic and accurate, and most importantly, assist in framing the policy recommendations that will be developed in the complete needs assessment report, which will be due January 1st, 2025. And just to let you know, the meeting frequency will be again, determined by our stakeholder group. We are proposing bi-weekly initially, but whatever seems to feel comfortable after we kind of get through the interim report, we'll go from that. And that the meetings will be done virtually or in a virtual/hybrid format. I think if there will be a time and point where we may have to meet in person to discuss, some more critical issues, prior to sending out the draft report. So that is kind of what we envision at the commission in terms of how the work group is going to go, and really look forward to hearing your thoughts on this later on after I finish up this portion of the agenda. Next slide, please. So I think, I guess it's already wrapped up the next steps. Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So I think the slide that we should be on is the discussion slide. Bridget, did we skip one? Oh, looks like it.
I don't think we have a slide in between those two.
Okay, then we can just look to the agenda, which has the discussion topics that have been framed out. Francis, do you want to take us through the discussion portion where we can hear from our stakeholders?
Sure, let me pop open. So I think, give me a second. So for the discussion topics, one of the big points kind of that came up in some of our meetings, I think in particular with Caltrans and asset management, was sort of our climate adaptation needs and the challenges that we're facing currently. And I just wanted to hear, how much this has impacted your ability to plan for and account for the cost of sort of those impacts on our transportation projects, because even with the passage of Senate Bill 1, adaptation was not something that was accounted for in terms of costs for when we are developing our projects or building them. So that is one discussion point we really wanted to hear from you guys on, because that also was not included in the 2011 transportation needs assessment. Another big shift there compared to the 2011 assessment is sort of collecting information on transit operation plans and needs, especially with the transit fiscal cliff and the challenges that we faced earlier on this year, and sort of the precarious state on transit funding in general in California. And then lastly, the revenue sources and funding projection considerations that we'll be looking at for both the interim needs assessment and the full needs assessment. So if you have questions, please feel free to either raise your hand and Justin Hall can let us know, or drop a question in the Q&A as well.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah, I'll give everyone another moment to either indicate either the virtual hand raise feature, or you can submit a written question through the Q&A tab. And Francis, as of now, I'm not seeing. Oh, wait, we do have one raised hand. Let me call on Mark Watts. Mark, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
All right, I have to unmute myself. Just a quick question. I noticed that there are no apparent participants from cities. And I do know that there are groups of very small cities that receive very little from SB1 that are concerned. So I'd be glad to chase some cities into the stakeholder list, but I think there may be some more benefit to having a little bit more outreach to them as well. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We'll take note of that, and please feel free to send me information or who contacts you feel that would love to work with us on development.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as of right now, I'm not seeing any other indication for a question or comment. Thank you.
Okay, so if questions come to you later, feel free to, oh, I see a question.
Yes.
Okay, will this effort bring in the work of the, yes. So ultimately, I think when we kind of get to the complete needs assessment, that is something that we're going to be talking about is, with our declining revenues and looking towards a more sustainable funding source, this will bring in the discussion of sort of road charge and what that may look like. And that is a discussion point we'll definitely have in our policy recommendations. We don't have anything specific, obviously, because, we're still forming the report, but it is, I think, something very inevitable that we will have to discuss and bring forth to the legislatures, in a realistic and sort of honest way. So yes, short answer is yes. And I also see a question or a comment in the actual chat. Our TPAs will be required to submit to CalSTA near-term and short-term transit financial information in order to receive funding through TRCP and ZTCP. So how our efforts are going to be coordinated, my understanding is that the report will not be done in time for our interim report. So we are going to use the information that they gather and hopefully publish in time for our complete needs assessment, because that will give us a really clear picture on the funding challenges, I think, that transit operators are facing in the state. Laura, do you have any additional sort of comments there?
No, I think that these efforts are very aligned and can be well coordinated. And so we look forward to working with all of you who are going to be helping to meet these requirements, as well as CalSTA and Caltrans, who are going to be helping coordinate on the state agency side. I did just want to bring something up that came to mind after Mr. Watts asked his question, which is that we've been trying to make a concerted effort to outreach through the League of California Cities and the California State Association of Counties. So what we can do is work through those two entities to make sure that our local government representation in this work group is robust. And we are also going to be hearing an update from the local government folks with respect to the local streets and roads needs assessment that was recently completed. That will serve as a really important input to this effort. Our commission is going to be getting an update on that at our August commission meeting next week. So thank you, Mark, for pointing out the importance of local government involvement in this effort.
Hi, William. I see your question. How will fund recipients be measured in an apples to apples manner on a statewide level or on a regional or MPO level? How can transit riders and their experience also be incorporated into these processes? So I will have to defer to Laura, I think, in how things may be included, I think, for this report. I think, the big thing is that we're definitely trying to just do an assessment as to what the trajectory of our transportation funding is across state and local revenue sources. So that is definitely what we're aiming to do in the report. And I think sort of the riders and experiences, I think what we can do is talk about the, again, precarious state of transit funding itself in the actual report. But Laura, I'm going to defer to you on.
Thanks, Francis. I just have a couple of things to add. So I just want to underscore, William, that in terms of fund recipients, to answer your first question, we plan to gather this information like at the most practicable, granular level possible, and then do our best to aggregate that up to a statewide level. So we definitely will look forward to getting input from like transit operators, for example, on how we can most feasibly do that. And then your point about transit riders and their experiences being captured in this effort is very well taken. There's specific direction in the legislation for us to work with community-based organizations and other types of groups that represent those very viewpoints. So hopefully between our engagement with those types of organizations, and if you in your day-to-day work on this have any suggestions about who we should engage, please let Francis and I know. And then also we should be able to get some good input in terms of folks to engage through consultation with our Equity Advisory Committee. So hopefully that answered your question, William. Thank you.
Oh, I see from Amy Thompson. Yes, we will be posting our agendas online in advance, hopefully, so people can see what we'll be discussing. And in terms of what we would like to see from the advocacy community, I think, the perspective of the challenges that people are facing in terms of the transportation realm of losing their services and how that's affected them, that's a big point, but also, without a sustainable source of funding, this affects, I think, our ability to access jobs, like I said, reach our climate goals or any other sort of goals that we have at the state level. So I think bringing in that perspective would really be good in helping us let the legislature know on that sort of ground level, like how over time it's gotten to be more challenging, I think, especially with the pandemic and how it's affected transit funding. Oh, and I see one more question. How will this effort avoid engagement fatigue on the part of the general public? Lots of outreach, not coordinating cross. So I think, we have a few public workshops, like we said, that we're putting out for the development of the report. So there's the interim report that has the one public workshop in October. And then we have the 2 workshops for the complete needs assessment in the spring and fall next year. But in terms of just stakeholder engagement, I think that's where the work group comes in to kind of avoid the fatigue for the public, but everything will be posted online and accessible to the public to see our agendas, minutes, and meeting materials in that regard.
I can add one thing to what Francis just said, which is to the best of our ability, we will try to build on any kind of existing meetings or work groups that already exist. So I think if folks have concerns about our workshops or our work group meetings approaching fatigue point, that would be a great thing for Francis and I to get some feedback on. And we are happy to talk with anyone about how we could be like more nimble or efficient in how we go about doing the engagement for this.
And Tony, I see your question. Will this effort touch upon workforce needs? So yes, I think that is a challenge. And one of the stakeholders listed in the legislation is, I believe, labor force or organized labor. So I know that, there have been sort of challenges as we've transitioned to, different technology with some of our transit operations and, how that may affect, but generally speaking too, I think there's just the cost of living and other things that are affecting us here in California. So I think broadly it will talk about like, the workforce needs. And again, I think especially on the transit side, it's just not like who's operating it, but also the challenges of accessing like jobs and other services. And, if there's no funding and we have to eliminate like services, that has implications for everyone too. So, yeah.
Maybe, Francis, I'll add one other thing to round out the answer to Tony's question. And I also want to thank Tony for providing a link to the City of Oakland's capital improvement program and suggesting that we look to local CIPs as an important resource in this effort. So we will definitely do that. Thank you, Tony, for that suggestion. And then I just wanted to mention one other aspect of workforce need in this overall effort. And it's something that was very distinctly part of the SB1 funding package, which was to really work on making sure that we are developing a robust workforce to accommodate the infrastructure needs that we have, and also to make sure that we are accommodating changing technology when it comes to transportation. So we definitely want to make sure that that is very clear in this assessment effort moving forward, and definitely look forward to any and all suggestions that our folks in organized labor, workforce development, community engagement, local government have on how they've been trying to tackle some of those challenges, or even just what the challenges are, so we can be very clear in that.
I also see that we have a few attendees with their hand raised at this time. I'd like to first call on Aaron Hoyt. Aaron, you're free to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this initial discussion here. I know that the staff here at the CTC will do a great job, as they do with many of the different programs that they've rolled out over the last several years, and continue on the great work of engagement to make sure that we're providing the most information possible to legislators. But as we do start this, I encourage, to the extent that's feasible, that we look at evacuation and wildfire emergency needs. This is one of the items that came up earlier in the year with a Caltrans program, which was a state highway systems management plan. And I think this is an important need that our agency from Nevada County Transportation Commission had mentioned at that point in time, that affects many of the rural Sierra Nevada counties, but also more inland communities in Southern California and the coastal areas as well. And I think the reason why this is important is that there's federal protect funding that's available now. And the governor had also had a budget initiative that put, I believe, $148 million into this program. So we have this protect funding that's going forward in the future, but right now there's a real lack of data and understanding about what these needs are for wildfire evacuation routes. And that can be seen in the final version of the State Highway Systems Management Plan that was released earlier this year by Caltrans, that identified $0 of the $1.74 billion that was available in the plan over the next time period that went to wildfire evacuation. So hopefully this is a starting point for us to start talking about this as a statewide need and identifying data points that can help further identify those needs we'll need in the future. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, and I think, to me, that will definitely be put into our climate, like sort of adaptation or resiliency. That will be a topic I think we'll be discussing, and how much we're dedicating funding, to not just the maintenance operation, but like the planning side probably. But yes, I will, that will definitely be folded, I think, into our climate adaptation discussion. So thank you for that point.
All right, up next we have Denise Sippert.
Hi, this is Denise Sifford with the Orange County Transportation Authority. So I have a couple of questions. Obviously, this is like a huge undertaking in a really short amount of time. I wanted to go back to one of the slides on the scope of the interim report. So it sounded like there was kind of work to be done on somewhat of a literature review of what's already out there, the information that's already available. I kind of wanted to get a feel for where regional agencies will be part of that discussion. If this is something that, you know, we are waiting for CTC. My other question after.
Denise, could you repeat your question? Unfortunately, I think my connection either got dropped off for a bit, but could you repeat the two questions you had?
Yeah, so I just wanted to get a feel for kind of how CTC staff and some of the regional agencies will be working together on this interim report in terms of if we will be waiting to have something to review from staff, or are we going to be just actively doing our own kind of literature review and looking at all of the documentations that we have, because of course there's so many things to pull from on our end too.
So I think for the interim report, we're pulling information, and I think we're going to come back and kind of at the end of this month, that's our anticipated date, the end of August, to come back to the stakeholder work group and have a discussion with you all on sort of our annotated bibliography on what we're hoping to accomplish in a report and what sort of information that we may not be capturing for sort of the problem statement / like what is the current like state of our maintenance and like what is the maintenance operation sort of state of the transportation system. I think for the second part of your question, sort of doing your own literature review or looking for other information, that will definitely come into play as we begin the development of our complete needs assessment report, because we'll get into more specific, I think, needs or details, especially when we're going to be talking about like what the projects we're identifying rolling up and the costs that are associated with those projects and our revenue projections. So that I think will come during the development of the complete needs assessment report. But for something our partners to kind of start thinking about as you guys look through your RTPs, your constrained lists, you know, what that looks like over the 10 years. If there's other information that you may not have that you're going to have, that we will have to work with, you know, smaller entities, more local municipalities to kind of try to get to ensure that we're really capturing accurately like those needs in the RTPs and RTPs. Yeah.
That makes sense. And then I had another kind of just thing I wanted to throw out there is I realized that you probably also already understand how much cost estimates can fluctuate. So I would definitely caution about things like being able to provide context for the numbers that are in there. A lot of the times, you know, we are usually changing cost estimates at different milestones within projects. And so I'd get a little bit nervous about locking us into some dollar amount that's going to be changing.
I think, you know, with the revenue projection, that's something we will talk, you know, yes, there's a straight line projection, but there are a lot of things, you know, that can affect the number that we will put out. No one expected us to go through a pandemic and, you know, with the cost of inflation, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, when times are good, it's great. But then if something else happens, if we hit a recession, we know that that's going to affect our revenue stream too. And I think those are things that we will put into the report saying that, you know, there are things that can change this potentially, you know, here are some factors to also consider there. So thank you for your points, Denise.
Thank you.
All right, up next we have Hannah Krager.
Hi folks, Hannah Krieger with the Green Lining Institute. Thank you for hosting this conversation. Regarding climate adaptation, I certainly recognize that infrastructure is a core component. And I also want to emphasize the importance of complementing that approach with a people-centered community resilience approach, kind of like the evacuation planning that was mentioned earlier. And particularly, like, we need to further understand at a more granular level, how do these adaptation and resilience needs vary when we compare, disadvantaged communities to others? And so just wanted to flag that Greenlining has developed a wealth of resources on equity and community-centered approaches to climate resilience, including from a transportation perspective, that we'd be happy to share. And we also convene a statewide community resilience working group and would love to find ways to continue those conversations. So thanks all.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, we'll touch base, and if you have any direct questions, please feel free to email me too.
All right, I was going to read a comment that came in the chat from Nancy Lowe that reads, "A significant hurdle we face is the existing insufficient funds to adequately uphold the present condition of streets and roads. Unless a reliable and ongoing source of funding is established, maintaining the current state of repair will remain a challenge, and making necessary improvements will prove difficult. Furthermore, as we confront new demands and challenges amplified by climate change, it becomes crucial to factor in the added costs over the entire lifespan."
Thank you for your comment, Nancy, and that's essentially why we're doing this report. It really is to talk about, even with the passage of Senate Bill 1, it's to bring us to the state of good repair. It doesn't, take us above sort of what those expectations are. And so, as the SB1 sort of reporting period ends in 2027, right, Laura, where we pick up and go to 2035, we will continue that discussion of, is this funding adequate to meet our transportation needs? If it isn't, what are our challenges? And, some of the big things that, we didn't really, I wouldn't say foresee, but, are affecting us a lot more than what did in 2011 when that needs assessment came out. And I think the great thing is that this report is going to be updated regularly so we can provide information to the legislature on an ongoing basis in that regard. So they have more current information as, in the future when they make some decisions on transportation policies or funding, et cetera.
We do have a few more attendees with their hand raised at this time. Next, I'd like to call on William Walker.
I do want to thank you for responding to the comments earlier about ensuring that voices can be heard that are not typically in the room. And I want to kind of continue to speak to it when you look at, I think that it was mentioned that there might be fatigue from the typical transit rider participating in these spaces. And I think that often we believe that when transit riders aren't able to speak in these spaces, that their needs are met by advocacy groups. And I just want to make sure that we continue to try to find ways to incorporate the story of riders that are, there are certain neighborhoods that haven't had transit service in 3 years. And there are certain transit operations that don't intend to reinstate those services. And if the voice of those riders that used to have service that no longer have service, and we'll have to make decisions that may not align with the climate goals of our state are made, that we need to make sure that there are spaces for those voices to be heard. I took a look at the language for the bill, and it's always clear what the number is for highway costs, and it's transportation, public transit costs that tend to fluctuate. And I know that that's the reason for this assessment, but we should be able to understand what it costs to run our transit systems. And I hope that this is also a space to look at how we can innovate and look at how we can do things differently. Often when a project hits its funding threshold, we just extend the project budget. And I know that this assessment was created so that we don't do that in the future. And so just understanding what that actually means and how the typical transit rider, the typical, resident of a community of concern can actually speak up and say how decisions that are made in regard to transit budgets, how they affect our everyday lives. So I hope I wasn't being redundant. I hope I'm offering more of a clarification of what I stated earlier. And thank you for your time.
No, thank you, William. I think kind of discussing how the fluctuation of funding for transit really affects people is something that will be taken into account for this assessment. And again, I think that's why there is a bigger sort of emphasis on transit operations and maintenance in this assessment as well. So you aren't being redundant, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Kenneth Cow.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. Kenneth Cow with the MTC. I think this is great, and I support the comments made earlier. I think what might be also helpful, in addition to what's already been discussed as related to like climate adaptation and resiliency, is maybe also teasing out some of the things that agencies are required to do, but may not have the funding to do, kind of like the unfunded mandates. So I'm thinking of things like, our transition on our bus fleet to zero emission, the ICT rule by ARB, and also some of the various kind of requirements from the water boards for trash capture and things like that. These are all things that we want to do, of course, to make sure that our transportation system is meeting the needs and not making our climate change situation worse. But also, a lot of those requirements don't come with dedicated funding, and so we have to make difficult choices to fund those mandates and then not fund other things that are also important. So I would recommend, as we look into developing the structure of the needs assessment, to kind of tease that out, especially since this is going to the legislature, and they can actually maybe help us, find some money for that and make sure that we are really bringing everything to the way that it should be. So thanks for taking my comment.
Thank you, Kenneth. Yes, I noted that. And, as we get moving along in identifying other considerations, we'll definitely be working with the group to ensure that we do provide that cohesive picture on the challenges that a lot of us face. So thank you.
Up next, we have Sarah Olson.
Thank you so much for convening this and for creating the space for us to talk through some of these things. My question is in regards to how will this report assess current transportation disparities? For example, will there be data collected on how funds are currently reaching disadvantaged communities and meeting their needs throughout the state?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. So this effort is going to be focused primarily on articulating needs that have been identified through existing planning processes. So there are processes underway all across the state, through regional transportation plans and other planning efforts that can offer some degree of insight into that. I think it will be an important topic to note that is important, but it will probably not be a robust component of the interim report or the full needs assessment, primarily because we are working on articulating at the high level what our overarching needs are. I think, and I just don't honestly believe that we could deliver that level of analysis in this report, but that's not to say that we couldn't highlight the importance of, the need for funding and investment, in vulnerable, underserved communities. Does that make sense? We're rolling up existing plans. We are going to be looking at analyses that have been done within those planning processes. And I guess what would be useful would be for our engagement with organizations like yours to help us understand if we're not accurately conveying needs. Oh yeah, Sarah, did that answer your question? Did you have any follow-up?
Yes, thank you for providing that answer. I think I would just uplift the need here that as this plan is being put together and to have an accurate needs assessment, being able, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, being able to understand, where needs are being met and where they aren't being met is just going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think we can talk through more of the nuance of how we go about reflecting that in a report sort of this magnitude across the state, where we will be doing sort of like call outs and roll ups to certain regions around the state, but our ability to get into like significant granular details really limited. But yeah, happy to continue the conversation and appreciate you supporting that point.
Okay, we did receive a couple written questions and comments during this time as well. From Denise Sifford, they ask, are specific projects expected to be identified in this report, or rather rolled up in summary by mode, region, country, district, etc.?
So Denise, I don't think specific like projects, as Laura was kind of talking about the granular level. We will be rolling up, I think, in summary. By modes, Laura, how do you anticipate?
Yeah, so how we have been thinking about this, and we're definitely interested in what others think would be the right approach, but it is very helpful to be able to organize this information based on region or some other geographic breakdown that would be understandable to the public and legislators. So while we are not envisioning this assessment to have like a robust project list, what we want to be able to provide is sort of a clear picture of the need. And so that could include mention of specific needs that may look like a project or a project concept. And we definitely think that some kind of breakdown or explanation of mode will be very useful. That is how we approached the 2011 needs assessment, and that's what we're anticipating doing again for this one. So curious though if anyone in the stakeholder group has any thoughts that they want us to consider as we go about doing that. Did that answer your question, Denise?
You unmuted me faster than I can type, so thanks. Yeah, this is helpful. I don't know if you kind of plan on maybe following a similar structure as that 2011 assessment that you mentioned, but if that is helpful context for some of us to have who maybe were not involved in 2011, maybe you could provide a link or an access to that document too.
Yeah, we could. I'm wondering, Francis, if we might be able to just share it out with the work group email, so folks have the benefit of that piece of this history right there. And I would say that we are generally following that format, but obviously there's a lot of new things that we're taking into consideration in terms of just where we are at in transportation investment, our current regulatory climate, all of that. So it'll be the same sort of general framework as the 2011 needs assessment, only sort of made more robust by what's in Senate Bill 1121. what it's specifically asking us to look at, adding things like climate resiliency, needing to look at how the transition to zero emission vehicles is affecting not only our revenue, but our infrastructure needs.
And I see a question in the chat, Justin.
Yeah, in the chat, we received a couple comments from William Walker, who stated regional comparison is good, but a metric that compares regions across the state would be immensely helpful. Nancy Lowe stated sending out the 2011 report would be great. And then a question we received from an anonymous attendee that reads, will this report also take into account the need for transit agencies to receive consistent electricity as we transition to battery electric buses? Will utilities be brought into this conversation? Climate adaptation planning is challenging when operations do not have guaranteed power during natural disasters or rolling blackouts. Thank you.
So I think in the report, we'll have a high-level discussion on sort of the infrastructure needs in supporting our transition to zero emission vehicles and the technology, but it will not go into specific discussion on what the cost of the infrastructure needs are for that. And I think that's something else that, as commission staff, we have talked about, with our partners on those challenges of providing a source of energy and sort of that cost. Yeah. So Laura, I don't know if you have anything else to state there, but I know that, we don't go into the actual cost of bringing, let's say, electricity on the grid there. It's a little beyond the scope of what we're doing.
Exactly. We definitely want to acknowledge that there is, significant cost associated with the transition to battery electric buses, for example. What we have to focus on in this assessment is what we're able to deal with from a transportation funding perspective. And so we certainly plan to look at existing bodies of work that are attempting to identify the magnitude of the effort to transition to an electric fleet. But what we'll be focusing primarily on is what are the costs associated with things like chargers and the vehicles themselves. Less so, like we are not able in this effort to try and pin down anything specific around like the cost of grid infrastructure, for example. Again, I think there'll be a lot in this report that will be sort of pointing to other places where information is available and sort of highlighting these things as important. But in terms of what we can actually assess in this report, we're going to have to focus on infrastructure associated with the transportation system, and that we could potentially fund with any new source of revenue. Hopefully that made sense.
I see one other attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Amy Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. So we've talked about this in various iterations, but I'm just curious. I'm excited to see the 2011 report when you guys send it around, just kind of thinking about, what sort of information will we have at the end of this, and what are we trying to kind of cultivate in the middle for this needs assessment. And I'm kind of seeing the CARB scoping plan of like, oh, we need to double transit service statewide to meet emissions goals. But I feel like we're also kind of talking about funding needs and how we might meet those funding needs. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more of, are you guys kind of proposing just identifying holes like funding needs, or will it actually go further of like places to find that additional funding, or like at what level does the funding research start and end?
So the way the legislation is written, the completed needs assessment will include policy recommendations for how funding shortfalls can be addressed. We are not able to get into that level of detail in the interim report. However, once we identify like the shortfall, once we've said, okay, this is what our projected revenues are, this is what our projected needs are, we have a shortfall. That is the time at which we will, as part of this assessment that goes to the legislature in 2025, there will be recommendations in that document that look at ways to deal with that shortfall. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, that's super
Okay.
helpful in terms of this year versus next year. Yeah.
Exactly. So this year is really about what's our problem statement in this. Like, we all know based on the information in front of us that transportation revenue is declining and that we have huge needs. So what this effort allows us to do is to all come together and to help articulate a very clear vision for decision makers that shows them this is the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with. And so the interim report gives us a chance to sort of introduce the problem statement, and then the full assessment is more of our opportunity to drill down on that, provide more detail, and then start offering some potential policy solutions.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Another question from Nancy Lowe. They ask, will this report include discussion on future needs, not only current needs, for example, infrastructure, road updates, and upgrades on the road necessary to accommodate fully autonomous vehicles?
So Nancy, we're going to be taking a 10-year look at our transportation needs. So currently and now and out to 10 years, I think we're going to be focusing really on the constrained portion of what's been identified in our regional transportation plans. So it will take into consideration those sorts of future needs. And, you know, that have a dollar amount associated with it that has, you know, been articulated again through the RTPs and RTPA planning documents on the constrained side. And I think just sort of that discussion of like the challenge of the funding shortfall, you know, regardless if we're already short on funding now, it's only going to be exacerbated essentially by, you know, what, you know, doesn't even have any funding associated with it in that state. And so I hope that answers your question in terms of that, what you asked. So. And then I see Sarah in your in the chat, you had a follow-up question stating that understanding that timing and staff capacity are limited, how do you plan to draw strong conclusion recommendations without granular data? And the information is used to draw these conclusions is available. How can it be shared in a transparent way with stakeholders? So, you know, this report will be required to be published and it will be posted online. And like I said, you know, we will be going through 2 workshops to kind of go and discuss, you know, what sort of policy recommendations should we be framing based on the information that we've gathered in the interim report, and as we're working to develop the full needs assessment in the spring. And then when we take, you know, what we hear from the spring workshop and work on, you know, really writing the complete needs assessment report, you know, we'll still be working with our stakeholders, but also at that fall workshop, you know, did we miss something critical? Like, was there anything that we completely overlooked before we take to the commission to just kind of provide their comments to in October of next year? And, you know, before it's finalized and sent to the legislature January 1st, 2025. So that's how we do really see keeping everyone apprised and as transparent as possible with our stakeholders. You know, also we'll be leveraging some of the broader expertise and considerations from our Equity Advisory Committee too, as well. They won't be the only ones, but, you know, there are lots of checkpoints that we're trying to do. And if there are any specific questions, again, you know, we are happy to meet with you too to discuss that. Hopefully I won't go too bonkers at that point in So I hope that answers your question. You know, I know it's kind of challenging not being able to talk on super specifics, but I think really honing in on the issue of just generally like the state of our transportation funding and like our growing needs. Like it's just the divergent lines that they're taking. I think should, you know, hopefully hit home on what that means, you know, for a lot of our representatives in terms of, you know, when we talk about funding like projects, what that will look like to them. And sort of, you know, anecdotally in 2016, when we had to delete projects from the STIP, that was not very good. So, you know, I don't think anyone wants to reach that point where it's not just delay, it's like, we literally cannot fund this. And it's just like, that's it. You know, there's just no money. So
I can take I can add to Francis your response on that to address the portion of Sarah's question about granular data. So I think granular data in my mind is, you know, us not being able to publish in this assessment the constrained project list for the SCAG RTP, right? I think that we would overwhelm the users of this report with that kind of granular data. What I don't want anyone to take away from this process is the impression that we're not going to be doing like a robust assessment of what the needs are. And I think that maybe what we need to do as we go through the work group process is start, you know, explaining and operationalizing how we'll go about doing that. And again, I want to reiterate that we'll be using regional transportation plans as a foundational input. So I think there is granular information that is part of the assessment itself, or in terms of coming up with the overall magnitude of what the needs are. I think our ability to express a lot of granular detail in what we publish and send to the legislature is more limited so that we don't completely lose our audience. Okay, got it, that's okay. You're good?
Yes, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and I think I probably have explained it earlier, was probably a bit confusing, and so thanks for your patience.
Okay, I see one other question from Colin Fisk, who writes, need assessments for streets and highways usually reflect both maintenance of existing infrastructure and projected needs to accommodate increased future traffic. But given that the state has targets for significant mode shift, and mode shift requires both sticks and carrots, will the report reflect the need to actually reduce future vehicular capacity by reallocating street space or even abandoning some infrastructure, and the savings that could be generated that way, along with the increased needs for transit and active transportation?
Francis and I are still reading the question and digesting it, so give us a minute.
So I will say, I think for this assessment, I think what we'll really try to do is highlight the need that we have for more funding, or the need that we need more active transportation funding, essentially. And I think kind of highlighting that, you know, the existing revenue source and streams is not adequate for everything. Part of the data collection that we are doing is not just transit, but also working with Caltrans on sort of their the information they have on the active transportation side with the districts and also with the regions, what they have planned as well. But in terms of, Laura, if you want to try to answer.
Yeah, I can chime in with my take on Colin's question, which is a very thought-provoking one, so thank you. Yes, like we are going to be looking at both the needs associated with maintaining and growing the system. And we are fully aware that how we grow the system is changing, right? There are a number of new requirements in place for how, across all levels of government, where it's a local city street or the state highway, like we're having to change how we plan, you know, and implement projects. And so what we are hoping to do through this assessment is to grab that 10-year need that is attempting to do that, right? So if you look at a regional transportation plan, or you look at the, SHSMP, or you look at, even the STIP, right? Caltrans portion of the STIP, there's been evolution in how we are investing in the system. And we want to make sure that that is very robustly represented in this needs assessment. And as someone who's worked in transportation for like a scary long time, and back when we really had no infusion of money in sight, the fact that we are given an opportunity to talk about like an unconstrained need is a huge opportunity. And so I hope that we can all come together and, realize that this opportunity allows us to look very, to be visionary in what we are able to articulate our needs are. So we want to definitely make sure that this assessment is more multimodal than the last one. And I think we have a lot of good inputs already lined up to ensure that it will be that way. And definitely call in if Francis or my response to your question didn't quite hit at what you were looking for. Please let us know.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other indication from any attendee that they wish to submit a question or comment at this time.
All right. It is 2:20 almost. So if there are no additional questions or comments, or if there's nothing that comes off the top of your mind, just again, feel free to email me or Laura for anything that you have. We'll be posting, well, I'll be posting the corrected slide deck. I apologize for that. Our sort of the presentation online later. And then also, we had discussed that the recurring frequency of the stakeholder work group and our next meeting. And our target date is the last week of August to have the next stakeholder work group meeting. I will post the agenda ahead of time so people can get a feel. We will be utilizing Zoom to meet virtually for our meetings unless we do a hybrid format. So then I will definitely let you know the location as to where we're meeting there. So those are the two big things. There's some follow-up information that I need to do, like sending out the 2011 needs assessment to everyone in the work group, and to ensure that we are reaching out with our municipalities, our local municipalities more too on this effort. So Laura, did I miss anything in terms of?
Nope, you did not miss anything. I just wanted to make a couple remarks to kind of help everyone understand sort of what you in particular probably need from them right now. So I wanted to just highlight that when it comes to our timeline on this, like Francis is really starting what is a critical period of gathering, like reviewing existing information and really starting to put pen to paper on the interim report itself. And so what I wanted to ask is that, by the end of this week, if you could possibly send us any really important considerations, resources, anything like that you would like for staff to be taking under advisement, that would be much appreciated. That would give Francis some time to digest some of this information prior to our next work group meeting at the end of August. I did also want to kind of speak back to something that Denise from OCTA raised, which is that we are absolutely going to have a process for engaging local and regional governments to make sure that we're adequately reflecting what they have been planning for over the 10-year period of this assessment. So that's something we can talk more about in our next work group meeting, is the process that we'll use to engage folks. We just really appreciate that you are all willing to be part of this process. So thank you for that. And I think maybe just in wrap up, I wanted to just kind of parrot back some things that we heard. I think it's not lost on Francis and I that this is something that we're going to have to make sure we engage with across all levels of government with, and then also our partners in the private sector, in the community-based organization sector, et cetera. We are absolutely going to be efficient and respectful of your time and do our best to avoid fatigue. And we both worked in government for a long time. We have pretty thick skin. So let us know if you feel like this process is not meeting your expectation. We want to make sure that we are absolutely capturing the perspective and needs of system users in this effort. We will definitely do our best to reflect the workforce challenges that have been brought to our attention. We heard the need to consider wildfire evacuation as part of our adaptation and resiliency work in this. Also providing context around the variability associated with cost assessments and estimates for projects. That's definitely something we want to make sure we're clear on. We heard the need to look at a people-centered resiliency approach. So we want to make sure we figure out how to best do that as we talk about resiliency in this assessment. Definitely heard loud and clear that we have insufficient funds to uphold the present condition of our infrastructure. Nancy, I'm probably going to grab what you wrote in the chat, and it's probably going to make an appearance in the report. It's a great statement. Thank you. We also want to ensure that we capture as best we can the costs associated with transitioning to zero emission vehicles, and really, to Kenny Cow's point, making sure that this assessment really makes it clear that there are many, many requirements that our transportation system needs to meet, many, many people that it needs to serve. And so making sure folks understand the cost of that. And then also making sure that, this assessment is a robust assessment of multimodal investment needs to meet, all of our state's various goals. So thank you for the time that you spent with us this afternoon, and please don't hesitate to reach out to Francis with any follow-up questions or thoughts you may have. And we will be in touch to schedule the next work group meeting.
Yeah, so Bridget, if you want to just pull up our contact information. So this is my and Laura's contact info. And then we do have a subpage dedicated to our Senate Bill 1121 work effort. So all the information will be posted there online for anyone to access. It will be remediated and made ADA compliant. So we really appreciate the time that you guys all took out of your day to join us on this kickoff meeting. And yeah, I will see you guys at the end of August. I'll send out a save the date on one that we land on. So I look forward to our next discussion and to bring something forward for all of us to really work on as well. Thank you. And I hope you all have a great afternoon.